have your thoughts changed at all? Having 24 hours to digest what we saw yesterday when it comes to the officiating controversies that we've seen.
I will say it is important to be hearing from some of the drivers about how all of this officiating gets handled. I believe Denny Hamlin came out on social media today after his podcast, basically outlining that he agreed with NASCAR's decision to throw the caution on the final lap because, we have to maintain safety at all costs. And I don't disagree with that. I hope that anything I said yesterday was not taken in a way that I don't want these drivers and the safety personnel that work at the racetracks, I don't want them to feel unsafe in any regard. That said, I still don't agree with yesterday's call. And it all boils down to, why do we throw cautions? We throw cautions to slow the field down and prevent a big mess from becoming a much larger and more dangerous mess. And while I agree if that was a caution at lap, let's say 175, we also need to consider that once the leaders cross the finish line, a caution is pretty much out anyway. Would I be correct about that? Everybody slows down on the final lap or after they cross the finish line. I just feel like comparing it to Daytona, where, yes, you're going to have, if a crash happens in turn 3 like it did last week, you have a mile and a half or so to slow down. If you compare that to Atlanta, yes, they're going to have significantly less distance and less time to slow down. But at the end of the day, the race is over. What would they be charging through the backstretch for, through a debris field? It doesn't make any sense. I just feel like when a crash happens at a pack racing style racetrack, we need to have a little bit more perspective. I feel like guys that are running in 27th that were, 3 or 4 seconds behind the pack because they have so much crash damage. I'm thinking of someone like Eric Jones, for instance, who was multiple laps down. Why would he be screaming through the debris field? And he didn't. So it doesn't really make sense from a common sense perspective why you would throw the caution, because by the time a caution is triggered by anybody in race control, you are obviously hoping that everybody's already slowing down because there's cars scattered around in front of them. Everybody is within 3 seconds of each other because a restart just happened, and they're all screaming through anyway. You're not going to get them to slow down because we don't have any sort of a limiter on the car that once a yellow is triggered, it just automatically shuts the engine down to a certain miles per hour delta and keeps them there. So it doesn't really make sense to me to throw the yellow there because it's not going to prevent anything else that's going to happen, at least in my view. So I would love to hear what you have to say. I know that what I have to say may not agree with what the drivers have to say, and frankly, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, well, I think they certainly have a very different perspective as the ones actually driving the cars than you and I would have here. Good to see one of our regulars, Amber, in the chat, matching yellow shirt. Ending on the caution. We didn't plan that. This is the Wings shirt that I've got on right now, the National Lacrosse League team. But yeah, that was just kind of a coincidence, I guess. But it is certainly a major talking point, and I think it's really unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate anytime officiating comes up in a sporting discussion, because you want to be talking about the performance of the athletes or the drivers or whatever, or the quality of the racing or sporting event that you're watching. But I think it's particularly a shame this weekend because in light of what we've seen the last couple of years at Daytona and Talladega, I think there's kind of a mindset right now that what we see, and we're in year 4 of this new Atlanta configuration. I think a lot of people have the mindset that what we're seeing at Atlanta right now is what we would love to see at the Daytona 500 or what we would love to see at Talladega. That's what the crown jewel of all crown jewels in our sport should look like. And we're seeing that at a mile and a half that's just been reconfigured rather than the World Center of Racing at Daytona International Speedway. And I think overall it was, at least on the Cup Series side of things, and trucks as well, to be fair, and we'll get into trucks and Xfinity obviously a little bit later on. I think it was a great race. It was just overshadowed once again by a controversial, consistently inconsistent finish. And I guess I'll repeat what I said in our team Slack chat after Kobe shared that Jeff Gluck tweet with quoting Denny Hamlin on actions detrimental today. And I said the problem is A, no one knows the standard due to be inconsistencies. B, Fox didn't show a clear replay until minutes after it happened. And C, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Tanner, or anybody watching the chat, but from what I saw, it seemed to me that by the time they actually threw the yellow, most of the pack was already clear of the cars that had spun out. And to your point, Tanner, once they cross the line, they're going to be off the throttle anyway. It's not like they're going to be rolling, coming out of turn 2 into a debris field and, that causing a safety hazard there. So, and then there's the fact that, and again, we'll revisit this in the truck series segment as well, but this conversation wouldn't be necessary if we could just finish the race cleanly. If we could stop wrecking on the last lap. That's what's, I think, the most frustrating part to me, is that we advertise to our viewers every week, these are the 40 best drivers in the world. And yet we so often, now more than ever, we're in more overtime finishes per year than we've ever had before. And even when we get to overtime, half the time the race ends under caution anyway, because they can't run 2 clean laps to finish the race. If these are the best drivers in the world, and yet this is the situation that we have with these overtimes and these, do you throw the caution? You wouldn't have to ask that question if we didn't have a wreck on the last lap. So, I know, excuse me, I know Carson Hocevar came under a lot of fire and criticism for some of the moves that he made in yesterday's race. Obviously, we've talked about, the truck series in the past, how they've kind of had that culture problem, and Hocevar certainly gained that reputation when he was in that series. But I don't know. I think that aside from the larger culture conversation that we have to have, I think, and I said this in the chat last night when you guys were on wrap up, whether you agree with it or not, I think everybody can agree on the problem above all else being that we need to have consistency in some way, shape, or form. So if you want to say they got the call right yesterday, that's fine. But then how can you look at what just happened at Daytona? How can you look at what happened the previous day in the Xfinity Series race and say that the decisions that race control are making in the tower are in any way, shape, or form consistent or can be anticipated or can be expected? I think that's the biggest problem that we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned it on yesterday's wrap-up show that Josh Berry had an exceptional day yesterday, and unfortunately it ended in a shower of sparks and a 25th place finish. And I just harken back to what I said. Why couldn't he have just accepted a 12th to 15th place finish, because he wasn't going to get in line before the end of that race? They were just going to keep blowing his doors off on the outside. And the only reason that crash happened is because he tried to squeeze into a gap that was not big enough for a car to be in. And obviously we had all of that destruction that we saw on the final lap going down the backstretch. If some of these guys could just get it through their head that they're not going to win from 7th on the final lap and could just accept that, hey, bringing home a clean race car in 15th is better than a wrecked race car in 25th or wrecking half the field and finishing 7th, then we would have a lot better culture in the sport. But unfortunately, NASCAR's root problem of the playoff system incentivizes these kind of moves. If guys felt that they could just escape with a good points day and that was good enough, these kind of things wouldn't happen. But unfortunately, if you can have the first 6 cars wreck in front of you and finish ahead of the cars that were able to make it through the crash, then surprise, you're in the playoffs. This is exactly what happened last week. And Josh Berry was probably hoping that maybe that's me this week. And unfortunately, that was not the case. And his mistake may have ruined a potentially great finish. And now it gives us something to talk about today and for the rest of the week. But I think by that point, we're going to be pretty tired of talking about it. But I don't know. It's just like every root problem that NASCAR has can be traced back to the sanctioning body and the situations they put drivers in. And if we could just have a little bit more common sense from both the officiating committee and from the drivers, maybe these races wouldn't end the way that they've been ending.
Yeah, well, and you brought it up, and I almost interrupted you because you mentioned winning from seventh on the last lap. That's exactly what William Byron did last week. He was running in seventh, I believe, exactly when the carnage happened all around him, and he just happened to find the path through that. And again, I take nothing away from him. He's a two-time defending Daytona 500 champion now, but you have to, I don't think you can, and I've said this on last week's show, I don't think you can look at the manner in which he's won each of those races and put it on par with, say, what Joseph Newgarden's just done at the Indy 500, winning back-to-back. I think there's a lot more hype surrounding Newgarden's two-time defending status as a 500 winner than William Byron's in NASCAR. And again, it's not necessarily Byron's fault. He was in the right place at the right time both years, but it's the situation that we have now at Daytona, and it's like, you look at that and say, what does that say about what's supposed to be your most prestigious race of the year? And then you couple that with what we get at Atlanta the very next week. And I like what my editor-in-chief at lastcard.info, Brock Beard, had to say yesterday. They hyped up the finish for more than a week with a documentary, endless replays of last year's finish, and the entire broadcast. And of course, it ended like that. Hysterical.
Yeah, pardon my language, but they were so damn close to another great finish.
Exactly.
Until they had the caution.
They really were. And it's just, again, I think hysterical is a good word for it. Like, of course, it would end like this after all the controversy that we've had. And I don't know. I think Jeff Gluck similarly just tweeted something yesterday, like, I've got nothing at this point. I don't even know what to say. So,
yep, another Elton edict ruins a great finish.
Yeah,
so
there you go. And I guess we should have seen this coming, because I know he came out and said after the Xfinity race that we made a mistake. We should have pressed the button, and then. Why are we surprised that that's what we get in the Cup Series the next day?
It's funny because I saw somebody on Reddit earlier today in kind of like a post-race thread about everything that went down. And somebody said something to the effect of, isn't it funny how in both of the scenarios where they probably should have thrown a yellow, they didn't. And when they shouldn't have thrown a yellow, they did.
Yeah.
And I just think that's perfectly encapsulates what NASCAR is all about in 2025. Making all the right moves at the wrong time or making all the wrong moves at the right time. So
yeah,
buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, I'm sure, for these next 34 races.
It certainly is. Let's catch up on the chat here a little bit. And we're bringing up, we got Coda next week. Hopefully no caution. I heard you on wrap up again though yesterday, Tanner, bringing up, we've got the new layout and what's that going to do for these drivers here if we get a late race caution? I don't know. I think we could be setting ourselves up for more controversy there. Good to see Matthew Owens in the chat behind the mic. 24 hours to digest, and I'm still not happy. I'm done with these judgment calls with a bunch of gray area. Either end the race of a scheduled distance no matter what, or don't hate me, Ben, just make a rule to end it under green no matter what, no matter how long it takes. And he continues, I'm just already fed up with controversial garbage to decide the winner of an event that has a finish line. Well, I'll tell you what, Matthew, I also like what you've had to say the last couple of weeks. You brought up the overtime line, which I know not too many people are very fond of in terms of their memories of that existing, that being a rule in our sport. But you've suggested converting the overtime line to a line where if we cross it on the last lap, then we finish under green no matter what happens in terms of if we get a wreck in the middle of the pack, we let the leaders at the very least race back to the start-finish line to finish the race. I don't know, Tanner, if you've heard that idea before, if you have any thoughts on that.
It's funny you mention that because I have had conversations with people where it's come up, but I wasn't sure if I've ever put it down into words. And funnily enough, I went back to my article from the last Daytona 500 in 2024 where I said NASCAR can't keep ending races like this. And I mentioned this to Joe after last week's show when we were off camera, that it would be nice if we used all of this technology we have to our disposal now to make the ending of these races a little bit more comprehensive, we'll say. I think that at a track like Daytona, Talladega, or Atlanta, where you are obviously carrying a high rate of speed and you're so clustered together that you could have a crash happen on the backstretch where one of three things does not happen, or any combination of the three. A roll cage or the catch fence is exposed or compromised in any way on any of the cars or at any point in the track. Because I think if either of those two things happens, it needs to be an auto caution. I don't care if it ruins an ending or not. That's where an actual present danger exists. Where if, God forbid, a car flying in at full speed for whatever reason in 27th flies in and hits one of the wrecked cars that has a roll cage exposed, we could be dealing with a very serious situation. Or if debris gets shot into the stands because there's a hole in the catch fence because a car is flying through again in 27th for God knows what reason, yes, absolutely throw a caution there. Or if a car isn't on its wheels, obviously throw a caution. If one of those three things doesn't happen, I don't see why we don't just go to the end. Or at an equivalent point on the track where there is a timing line that all the spotters know, hey, if a crash happens here, we can finish the race at this point in the track. Like if there is a crash in turn 1, we have a timing line at the exit of turn 4 that acts as a finish line. If we're going to use timing lines to go ahead and determine how cars are placed during cautions and during stage breaks, then we need to use that same technology at the end of races and use them as de facto finish lines. Like, I don't see why we can't do that. There is definitely a point on the track where if a crash happens on it, we can have an equal point on the other end of the track where the cars could race to, and we still get a thrilling conclusion to the end of the race, and we still have enough time for the cars to decelerate before they enter a debris field or, a graveyard of cars, basically. I just feel like at the end of the day, we are in 2025 with so much technology that we have on offer, and we just don't use hardly any of it to actually enhance the racing. And it's really starting to irritate me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, and I also agree with what you're saying about, like, of course, if we, and the two races that come to mind for me are 2020 and 2021 Daytona 500s, like Ryan Newman getting hit in the roll cage or whatever, like, of course, that's an instant caution. And the fireball that we saw in the last lap wreck for the following year, of course, you have to throw a caution if it's that serious. But, a few cars spinning out, even if the hits are, relatively hard, if it's at the back of the pack and the leader's going to have plenty of time to slow down on the cooldown lap anyway, I don't know. At some point we need to have a more defined rule in place. And as Matthew followed up with here, maybe it's a rule that varies from track to track. That wouldn't hardly be unprecedented. We have the double yellow line rule, I think is what he's referring to, special rules on super speedways for 25 plus years. In the lower series, you've got the rule that you can't lock bumpers. That's a rule exclusive to those series, exclusive to those tracks. So, it would hardly be, unprecedented to make a rule, specific to a certain track type. I don't know. I think that there has to be, I think we can all recognize that we have a problem. And I said this on last week's show, I think, as well. I don't know that I have the best one size fits all solution in mind, but somebody's got to start going to the drawing board and try to figure something out before we get to, really starting this week at COTA, but particularly before we get to Talladega in several weeks here. I think that that's something that we need to really figure out.
I don't even want to get into talking about cautions at road courses. That will make me upset. The fact that we don't have local yellows in 2025 when we definitely have the ability to pull a local yellow, it's a little goofy at this point.
Yeah.
It's a tired bit.
Yeah, you want to talk about technology. The fact that it's 2025 and we still can't figure that out. And again, we're not running the full layout at COTA this year, so we'll see if, I don't know, maybe, especially when you're running a track, that long, or like back in the day when we went to Road America, a 4-mile track, like it just kills you to have a car go off into the gravel of one section of a track and you've got to shut the entire thing down because we don't have a local yellow system in place. One more comment here from Matthew, and then we'll move on here. Don't get me started on the locking bumpers rule, a ridiculous rule that apparently isn't in place for Atlanta, why not? Couldn't tell you. I don't know. That's a question you got to take up with
It's a
NASCAR
mystery.
themselves. And Joe brings up a good point as well. Virtual safety car or slow zone should be introduced to NASCAR and IndyCar too. Yeah, I mean, Formula One's had that for a decade now. I think right when I think 2015 was really the first year I started watching F1 full time. I think that was the year the VSC was introduced. So they've been playing with that technology for a full decade now. I don't know. Maybe there's something there, at least on road courses, that the NASCAR or IndyCar could try to look at implementing as well.
Would be nice to see them try to incorporate some technology into how these races play out. At this point, it's like we keep doing things the same way and getting the same conversations and controversy. So why not just try something different at this point?
Yeah. Well, it's like, and I remember this conversation coming up last month during the NFL playoffs. Like, it's 2025 and we're still using a pair of human eyes, yards away from where the football is located, looking through a pile of 15 guys trying to spot where the ball is on 4th and 1. And it's like, that's the best. How do we not have better technology than this at this point to be able to determine whether it's a first down or not? So it's not just, I mean, baseball was very slow to implement instant replays, and that's a whole nother conversation that you can get into with stick and ball sports. But it's a conversation that's come up all over the place, is trying to find the best way to take the technology, the modern day technology that we have, and use it to make our officiating a little bit better than it currently is. I think NASCAR's fallen way behind in that.